we're now going to do f of x is equal to 2 sine x plus 1. Now these are misbehaved graphs. Now these graphs are called the graphs with a shift. Your standard graph was the 2 sine x graph. We're now going to shift that graph 1 unit up. So remember guys, positive means shift up. Negative, shift down. That means the entire 2 sine x graph, after sketching your 2 sine x graph, that entire graph needs to be shifted 1 unit up. And if it was 2 sine x minus 1, it means that entire 2 sine x graph needs to be shifted 1 unit down. So let's get started. Okay. Let's draw, and they also give you, they tell you from x being an element, for x being an element of 0 to 360 degrees. Okay. Now guys, I'm going to show you a bit of a cheat way, right? A legal cheat way, right? Which sometimes other institutions or other presenters or other teachers or educationists or facilitators or whatever you may call it, they might tell you, they might call it the mother graph. We're going to call it the cheated graph, the Hong Kong graph. Call it what you want to. It's a Bombay graph. South African lingo, Bombay, something that just doesn't happen, right? So we're now going to draw the 2 sine x graph. So here goes. Remember, 0 to 360, your step is still 90 degrees divided by 1. Sorry, why am I putting plus? Divided by 1, which is still 90 degrees. That means the graph is still going to make its change every 90. So 0, 90, 180, 270, 360. There we go. 90, 180, 270, 360. It's still going to go up to 2, 1, 2, minus 1, minus 2. Right. That's your original graph. Right. What we're going to call the cheated graph. The 2 sine x. So ignore the shift. Just draw the 2 sine x graph. Now I'm going to draw it in a different color because that is the graph you're going to need to erase at the end. Right. So it's just a guide. So we draw the guide graph. So the 2 sine x graph is going to go from 0 up to 90, cut at 180, dip at 270, and stop at 360 degrees. Every 90 degrees. It's a sine graph, so it starts at 0. So there we go. That's what your graph looks like. That's a cheated graph. We're now going to take that entire graph and we are now going to shift that graph. How many units? 1 unit. If that was plus 2, it would go up 2 units. If that was 3, 3 units. Whatever the shift is. Okay, let's now get started. So now we're going up 1 unit. So now again you keep on telling yourself instead of. So instead of your graph instead of your x-axis being at 0, your x-axis is going to be shifted 1 unit up. So now your new x-axis is going to be at 1. And you put your new markings directly above your old markings. Instead of your graph peaking or reaching an amplitude or a height of 2, it's now going to go 2 plus 1. So it's going to reach a height of 3. So that's going to be the maximum height of the graph. Instead of it dipping at minus 2, it's now going to dip at minus 2 plus 1, which is minus 1. And now we sketch our graph. So instead of your graph starting at 0, it's now going to start off at 1. And it's a sine graph, so it goes from your y-axis up. And we're following our new markings, not the old markings. So this is what your graph now will look like. Go up, turn, come down, cut, come down. Remember, it can't go below minus 1, so it turns here, following your new marking, and it stops there. And that, guys, that is your 2 sine x graph plus 1. You can see that the entire graph, that was your original graph, it has shifted 1 unit up. So these two graphs have got to be 1 unit space throughout. They completely parallel to each other. They can never touch. If your two graphs, if your original graph and your new graph are touching, you know you're wrong. Okay, so it must be completely 1 unit space. Now you may ask the question, is that my final answer? Is that the way I leave it? Obviously no. you've got to leave in your answer, you leave the original axis, so this is important, please make a note of this, leave the original axis and your final graph. So there it goes. We now leave our original axis and our final graph. So now original axis, final graph. So everything else gets erased. And you show no trace that you've done this. They will mark it incorrect. They don't want to see it. It's not important. That you did for your own guide. Those were your guide rails for yourself, not for anybody else. And guys, that is what your final graph looks like. We said, so it was your original sine x graph and your original sine x graph that started from 0 and it has shifted 1 unit up. And you know you're right. You can call this one graph F, put the F anywhere. Because your normal graph started at 0, your new graph starting at 1. Right? It's still reaching a maximum height of 90 degrees. Where it would have went up to 2, it's now going up to 3. Where it used to dip until -2, come down to -2, it's now dipping at -1 and stopping there at 360 degrees. They could even adjust this. If they told you from 0 to 270, say they adjusted this and they told you from 0 to 270, you still can draw the full graph. All you do, you cut off your graph at 270 degrees. So anything after, let's see, where does 270 end? 270 supposed, okay, the graph's supposed to go like that. Stop there. Anything after is all out.